Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone had a good lunch break and is ready to go. This is always my favorite session, the one after lunch. I guess maybe just as a little bit of a reflection, and perhaps it was my own myopia showing, but for a long time, when I thought about the role of nuclear technology in national and international security considerations, what came to mind right away by default was nuclear weapons technology and nuclear weapons policy, issues of nuclear disarmament, nuclear weapons non-proliferation, arms control, and nuclear deterrence dynamics. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, the destruction in Ukraine that followed, and the broader geopolitical turmoil that has emerged as a result, at least for me personally, has shown a light on the central role that nuclear energy and the civil nuclear sector play in national and international security dynamics, in addition to the focus that we have on nuclear weapons technology and nuclear weapons policy. The weaponization of nuclear safety and energy supply by an aggressor state in the course of a military conflict, the use of misinformation to stoke fears in the population for operational and strategic gains, and the energy security implications of a highly interconnected, and as I've come to realize, frankly, not a particularly diversified nuclear energy sector globally, were all issues that have come center stage for governments, for industry, and for civil society. Thankfully, here in the UK, we have long had both the policy and the technological expertise to play a central role in understanding and in tackling many of these issues at a global level. And the UK is very fortunate for that and to be able to play that central role. Today, we are very lucky to have with us Christopher Heffer, who is the Director of Nuclear Power, Infrastructure and Decommissioning at the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. So he's the one that leads a lot of the smart people in our civil service thinking about and working on these issues. Christopher is an engineer by training. He had previously spent time with Deloitte, working in a variety of sectors, including sciences, manufacturing, and consumer business in Japan, Germany, France, and the US. He subsequently held a series of roles within the civil service, including as Deputy Trade Commissioner for Northeast Asia, based in the British Embassy in Tokyo, where he was responsible for trade and investment across all sectors, including the nuclear sector. Christopher took up his current role in August 2021, so he has seen the department and the nuclear sector as a whole through quite a few changes, and we are very privileged and very happy to have him joining us today. So with that, Christopher, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Darya, for the kind introduction. Good afternoon. Whereas we've got the graveyard post-lunch slot, so I should try and keep you entertained. I'll try and do some slides for 10 or 15 minutes and happy to take kind of Q&A. I can see photos already. I think I'm on the record for the slides, so they are civil service-ified, if that's appropriate, sort of technology, and then we can see where we go in the Q&A. Thank you for the kind introduction. Happy to sort of endorse many of the kind of framing, and I'll try and pick up on a bunch of those points. Let me just try and cover the international context, which I think you pick up bits of that. Something around civil nuclear power and kind of energy and how that relates both domestically and internationally. A bit about HMG policy. It's month 2.5, so kind of early days, early doors, see where we go. And a little bit, and I think you have my fellow co-collaborator this morning, Joe Pitt-Rashid in MOD. He and I work together across our departments just on how we integrate, if that's the right phraseology, we work across civil and defence. So, quite a changing international context, as you sort of set out, Darya. We've seen what feels like a climate sort of change emergency. I could probably use those phraseology now, driving a whole bunch of activity towards net zero, and the take-up of nuclear. That's accelerated post the illegal invasion of Ukraine, and you've seen large swathes of Eastern Europe try and kind of solidify their value chains. You've seen a bunch of European countries, including Czechia recently, now commit to new nuclear. Holland, Sweden, Finland, Poland, others, all looking at it. And I'll tell our own story here in the UK as well. And then COP 2026, the UK put nuclear on the agenda for the first time at COP. And then 2028 last year, a commitment signed up by 22 countries, I think, to treble nuclear power globally. So kind of nuclear back on the global stage, both through a climate change lens and an energy security lens. There we go. Right, where are we in the UK? It's a little map of the civil nuclear sector. I was reflecting, a bit like DNO, we quite like the seaside. Probably for different reasons. You like putting it in boats and ships. I think we like the water, either for cooling or for discharging various things too, and a few bits. If you're non-fishing, you're allowed to be not by the sea. Other than that, you're kind of by the sea. But across the country, and a few places up in Scotland with a slightly different set of regimes on new nuclear power, which is devolved. What does it say? 83,000, I think, across our joint sectors, 60-odd thousand in the civil nuclear sector. One of the bodies I'm responsible for, the NDA, Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, 17,000 people, about 15,000 of whom at Sellafield. So it's a large part of our existing industry kind of on the civil side. I've got a technical slide for the numbers people in a moment. Let me introduce it before you get very excited by a load of scatter graphs. So our kind of net zero challenge sitting in the Department for Energy Security and net zero is to decarbonise Britain, net zero by 2050. And a couple of components to that. The first one is the power grid, the electricity that we kind of get through the sockets. Previous government wanted to make that net zero by 2035. This government has accelerated it 2030, which is 5.5 years away. So decarbonise the power grid. The rest of it then is buildings, heatings, insulation, and people's kind of homes and industry, which is a large task to go and do. So you need to decarbonise the electricity kind of grid at the moment, partly because we use gas to heat our homes in the UK, and we use gas as the balancing system in our grid. We are therefore very exposed to gas, we are very exposed to gas prices, so it's both the carbon we don't like and the volatility post-Putin that we do not like. And so you can make an argument on both climate change and energy security to decarbonise the grid. 2030 is pretty ambitious, see if we get there. That's not on the record. Sorry, this government is committed to getting there by 2030. It's quite ambitious. You need to keep going. So the demands are that we will double the electricity demands forecast from 2030 to 2040, driven by those two things, which are heat pumps, swapping out your gas boiler, for an electricity-driven heat pump, and electric vehicles. There's a little bit chicken and egg, a little bit in government's demands, but those will double the demands on the grid. So you need to keep going, having hit 2030. So even if you don't think you can get much new nuclear for 2030, discuss, you need it beyond that as well. So how much nuclear do you need? Right, here's a scatter graph for you. I'm told this is a mixed audience of academics, think tanks, and some techie people. So you've got a couple of graphs there with a lower demand electricity scenario on the left and a higher demand on the right. And your two axes are system cost on the y-axis and emissions intensity, so how much you're decarbonising on the x. And then they run a whole bunch of scenarios in this magic model with different winds, different climate conditions, and sort of plot for a given mix of technologies what is the system cost and how much carbon does it use. And the black ones, start with those, are renewables only. So if you just have a system based on renewable, on average for different conditions, that is either higher cost for the same carbon or more carbon for the same cost. So to balance out that system, which is less variable on renewables, you start to add in technologies, and you add in bits of CCUS, which is the blue, I think, red, which is nuclear, and yellow, which is all of those technologies. So it's renewables and CCS and nuclear. And you see the more you have a better mix of technologies with different amounts, you bring down the average system cost, because it's the bit that powers it when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, and you bring down the decarbonise of it. So you need nuclear as part of your mix. You can debate whether that's 10, 15, 20, 25, but there's different scenarios in there. And that brings down the overall system cost, even if nuclear is at the margin more expensive technology. So that's the department modelling from 3 years ago. So you need new nuclear, which is great. Other than that's what we're currently doing on nuclear. So just as my dear MOD counterparts are beginning a nuclear renaissance across all parts of the nuclear industry, so we need to do the same on nuclear. The last plant we built successfully was Sizewell B in 1995, it says there. The existing AGR fleet in most of the orange is coming offline, some in 2026, some in 2028, might go on a little bit further beyond that. Depending on when you think Hinkley's coming on board, EDF have said 2030, if there or thereabouts. That gives you another 3.2. You might just have sizable B left on the bars come 2030. So we are a proud P5 nation with 1 gigawatt of nuclear on the bars in 2030, kind of where we start. So the only way is up. So we've got Hinkley Point C being half built by EDF at their risk. We sort of transferred the risk to government, to private sector. Sizewell C next off the blocks, half owned between us and the French government, active capital raise, and that is kind of ongoing. And then discussion of policy and various programs beyond that. I guess just to touch on what sort of government policy, this is mainly a run through history rather than kind of current, about how we try to drive some of that forward. The Labour Manifesto, which I'm sure you've all memorised coming into this thing, talks about, I've removed the line about ending the dithering. The following line says, we will ensure the long-term security of the sector, extending the lifetime of existing plants, get Hinkley over the line. New nuclear power such as Sizewell C, SMRs will play an important role. And then good skilled jobs. You kind of saw that coastal deployment for new nuclear. And I guess this is the sort of technology mix we're kind of looking at within the civil nuclear space. So you've seen gigawatt, large scale, 3.2 for 2 reactors at Hinkley, slightly smaller ones. So Czechia have just agreed to get some Korean ones, I think 1,400, 1.4 gigawatts. Proven technology, provenly quite expensive, if you watch the kind of EDF. So we know it costs a lot. If you go down to Hinkley, 12,000 people on site, it's a small construction town. It's an extraordinary feat, and it's amazing to watch, but these are not easy projects and they take a while. SMRs, various ones in the licensing process in the UK. Canada's probably most advanced in deploying those, but nobody's actually ever built one fixed, I should say, and to land successfully in kind of regulatory environments. Promise of different economics. If you build a fleet of these, do the economics come down? Can you solve that one-off construction risk by putting it in factories and assembling on site? When will you know some of those things? And in the sort of K vernacular, we've distinguished SMRs, sort of generation 3 light water reactors, from generation 4, different salts, different coolants. Advanced modular reactors, which also might produce heat that industry can use, that decarbonising the industry piece, have capabilities around changing their base load, so actually be able to load follow, has massive advantages, starts to look like a sort of negative battery, that has big advantages potentially in the system as well. The US is paying best part of $2 billion to take 2 of those technologies forward in the US. And then fusion, and I won't do the joke about fusion, but it was on the GCSE course when I did it 30 odd years ago, and we're going great guns on fusion. So you sit there with a range of different technologies, different promises, different economics, and you sit there post-Putin and the climate saying we need to make big bets on nuclear, what do you want to bet on? And the answer is, well, when will you know if they work? 2037, 2038? Will I know what an economics of an SMR really looks like? So it's an era of making big bets in uncertainty and not being able to wait. And that's kind of where we are, why this is not easy, and you look at your risk across those. I'll come on to the MOD in a moment. We've learned some steps in the UK that helps you deliver that. I think we've learned that nuclear is government business. We tried a sort of market-led development model. We've seen one player deliver in the UK, EDF, and 1/3 Chinese funded is the only 2 states that deliver in a market-based solution. So you've learnt you probably need a state-backed developer. So Great British Nuclear set up last year. Most countries have some sort of state-backed utility or some sort of state-backed developer for nuclear. That's up and running. That is overseeing the selection of a future SMR and an SMR program, and that is ongoing. That has now also bought some sites. So no longer is nuclear like supermarkets where you might bid for the best location if you're the best company, but in fact government is now owning 2 sites where it wishes to deploy nuclear. So we bought Wilfer in North Wales, or Anglesey I should say, and Albury-on-Severn off Hitachi, whose project didn't happen. So taking steps for a state-backed utility for a developer, taking steps to own the land on which you need nuclear, taking steps to change the financing nature of that. That CFD, the contract for difference that EDF signed for Hinkley, puts all the risk on them and we pay an output price. Different model, the regulated asset-based model, starts to share the risk between developers, starts to give a lower but fairer return to the developer and starts to share some of those risks kind of more with government, makes it more affordable. I did sit out in Tokyo for the last 6 years before doing this job, trying to watch Hitachi and Toshiba set up projects. They are $100 billion revenue companies. They are not big enough to take the risk on nuclear. Toshiba nearly went bankrupt through one mistake, through one part of one subsidiary in one country. Nuclear is just too big, even for big old companies. So you need some of the state-backed support. So state-backed body, owning the land, kind of more state-backed kind of finance behind it. So nuclear is becoming more government business in how we deploy new nuclear here in the UK. Two other bits for this forum, if you're interested on. So I also cover fuels and the fuel cycle. I'm sure many of you kind of know your way around the little cycle from sort of on the bottom left here, mining, converting that into hex, which is almost a gas, warming up a bit, making it into a gas, spinning it and enriching it, deconverting it, make it into fuel, and then either disposing of it in a GDF if you've got one, or reprocessing that back round. So that's the kind of fuel cycle, that's sort of the fundamental bit. In a different world, we should be called not the nuclear sector, but the uranium sector. It's called the oil and gas sector. That's the fuel. We should call this the uranium sector. Other fuels also available. I've coloured in red for you there, China and Russia. And you will see they're present in all parts of the fuel value chain. They're present in quite large parts across that. And we have noted, suffered, and worry about their dominance in that. We've worked with sort of, I call them Western allies, the Sapporo 5, signed up in Sapporo in Hokkaido at G7 last year, to try and stand up Western capabilities across much of that value chain, includes Japan, which I'll quote in the kind of Western set here. Enrichment, obviously, the UK sits on, US to a far lesser extent, but restarting some of our conversion capabilities we don't have anymore. We did up at Springfields until about 10 years ago. And that's slightly more kind of market-based manufacturing one. So how do we stand up a Western offer in this space? How do we wean and support some of those countries off cheaper Russian fuel? And then lastly, because I also sponsor the NDA, the decommissioning, which is a not insignificant, do I have a number, £230 billion liability hidden in the government's accounts. The largest single provisional liability in the government. I will leave you to go and look up the second largest at some other point. It's huge. We don't have a GDF for it. We have a large amounts of highly toxic, highly hazardous waste sitting at Sellafield very deliberately. Some of that we know what to do with, and it's being slow. Some of that we don't know what to do with, and we need to work out what we do with all of that. We have, I guess, a different look going forward to planned nuclear power plants, so actually requiring a funded decommissioning plan to keep the waste on site and put it in the GDF. Coping with our legacy is a large part of what we are still doing nearly 100 years on, and there's good conversations with the MOD about are there bits of their legacy that we should work together on. I'm going to leave you with a question and a last government policy. Apologies for that, but you had my colleague Joe Pitrasheep this morning. We're working, and there's colleagues in the room from MOD, around how do we now take two enterprises forward, both on the defence side and the civil side. How do we do that renaissance kind of with you and in line with each other as a sort of nuclear nation, which we will be. The last government integrated review refresh February 23 had the following statement. We will proactively look for opportunities to align delivery of the civil and defence enterprises, seeking synergies where appropriate to ensure a coherent demand signal. New government's kind of 2.5 months in, so I don't have a sort of ready copy and replace set of public lines to kind of give you. I guess we're working pragmatically on the places that it makes sense to do so, and that still feels the case today, whether that's skills or the national kind of skills plan the last government put forward, supply chain, how we work across that, various different sites, legacy and decommissioning, I've touched on, future labs, future demand signals. There may be other areas. So, bit of a placeholder. We're doing the sensible things. We'll let this government kind of get its hands around it and set out its own statement. I think that's my whistle-stop tour around the world of kind of civil nuclear, a touch point for some of the interests. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.